The evening air in Charleston carried a soft, salty breeze from the harbor, sneaking in through the cracked window of Linda Whitaker's modest apartment. She stood in front of the tall mirror propped against the wall, holding up a navy dress she had ironed twice to be sure no wrinkle remained. It wasn't new, but she had stitched the hem with steady hands, pressed the fabric until it glowed faintly under the lamplight. Tomorrow her son would marry, and she wanted to look presentable, respectable, someone Daniel could glance at across the aisle and feel proud of. On the bed lay a pair of simple heels, a clutch she had bought at a thrift store, and a small bottle of drugstore perfume she saved for occasions too rare to count. Daniel appeared in the doorway, tall and striking in a brand new suit. The cut fit him perfectly, framing broad shoulders and a confident stance. His dark hair had been neatly trimmed, and for a moment Linda's chest swelled with pride. He looked every bit like the man she had hoped he would become, handsome, assured, ready for life. "Sharp suit," he said, turning toward her with a practiced smile, then glanced at the dress in her hands. The smile faltered. "Mom, you're not planning on wearing that tomorrow, are you?" Linda laughed lightly, expecting the question to be teasing. "I asked Marisol to cover my shift at the office building. I'll sit in the back, quiet as a mouse. Maybe cry a little when I see you standing there in your tux. You won't even know I'm there." But Daniel didn't laugh. He crossed the room, his polished shoes muting the creak of the wooden floor. His expression hardened. "We talked about this. Sophia's parents, Mom, there you know who they are. Old Charleston. Her father sits on the board of the Historic Foundation. Her mother hosts charity galas with the governor's wife. The reception is going to be filled with people like that. And I'll get my hair done," Linda offered quickly, her voice thinner than she meant. "There's a salon on Meeting Street that does walk-ins. I'll have a manicure, maybe even rent pearl studs. I'll look fine. It's not about pearls." His voice cracked before he steadied it. "It's about appearances. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I don't want anyone to wonder why my mother looks like she just got off a cleaning shift." The words hit harder than he knew. Linda lowered the dress, letting the fabric pool over her arms like water slipping away. "You think I'll embarrass you," she said quietly. Daniel sighed, tried for a softer tone, and took her hand. His grip was firm, the hand of a man ready for the future, but it was still the same hand she had held crossing streets, the hand she had guided through fevers and nightmares. "It's not that. Mom, you work as a cleaner. People will talk. Please don't come. I'm asking you to let this be my day." She stared at his hand, at the veins running beneath the skin, the faint scar on his knuckle from a childhood fall. "Your day," she repeated almost to herself. Relief washed over his face as if her silence confirmed his wish. He picked up the garment bag, draped his jacket over his arm, and paused at the door. "Thank you," he said. "I'll call you after." Then he was gone, leaving the apartment filled with a stillness too heavy to bear. For a long time, Linda didn't move. The navy dress slipped from her arms and crumpled on the chair. Only when the faint wail of a siren rose from the street did she stir, walking slowly to the closet. From the top shelf, she pulled down a battered plastic bin, setting it gently on the kitchen table. Inside lay the fragments of a life in photographs. Daniel as a toddler with storm gray eyes, Daniel at a science fair, ribbon pinned crookedly to his shirt, Daniel at prom in a rented tux, shoulders not yet certain of their width. She touched each picture as if it might shift beneath her fingertips. The tears came then, not loud but steady, like rain finding its rhythm against a window pane. She pressed the photographs to her chest, her heart aching with both pride and grief. Tomorrow her son would take vows, step into a new life, and she, his mother, would not be allowed to witness it. Linda lowered her head, the lamplight soft on her hair, and let the tears fall. The photographs blurred, but she held them anyway because they were the only proof that all those years, all those sacrifices had been real. Long before Charleston's salt air and quiet streets became the backdrop of her life, Linda Whitaker's story began in the shadows of loss. She was barely 2 when her mother disappeared for good, rights terminated by a family court after too many nights of neglect, too many reports filed by neighbors who had heard the cries of a child left alone. There was no father to claim her. The state became her guardian, and the foster system became her world. The juvenile home that took her in was a brick building on the outskirts of Columbia, South Carolina. It looked sturdy from the outside, with a playground in the yard and tidy curtains in the windows. But inside it was another story. The foster staff were underpaid and tired, stretched too thin. Meals were often bland, sometimes missing. Older children ruled the hallways with sharp elbows and sharper tongues, and discipline came not with kindness but with shouted orders and the occasional slap. Linda quickly learned the art of silence. She kept her head down, folded her small hands in her lap during meals, and slept curled tightly on the top bunk as if to make herself too small to bother. Yet she could not erase her spirit completely. Teachers at the public elementary school noticed her storm gray eyes, the way she absorbed every lesson, clinging to knowledge like it was food. Reading became her escape. A book could take her far away from the mildew-stained walls and the shouting in the next room. By the time she was 10, Linda had already endured more than most adults. She had seen other children return to parents who promised sobriety but fell again, had watched friends age out into homelessness or disappear into yet another placement. She promised herself she would survive, that she would not become one of the forgotten. It was a child's vow, but it burned inside her with the heat of something eternal. At 16, she aged out of the group home and into independence. There was no family to cheer her on, no safety net waiting. What she had instead was a cot in a shared apartment with 2 other girls from the system, a few sets of secondhand clothes, and the resilience that had carried her this far. She found a job the next week at a roadside diner along the highway that cut through the town. The place was called the Palmetto Grill, its sign flickering neon against the night sky, promising hot coffee and homemade pie. The work was grueling. 12-hour shifts on her feet, the smell of grease clinging to her hair, hands raw from scrubbing booths and balancing trays. Yet there was something steady about it, something she could count on. Truckers tipped well when she remembered their orders, families passing through left smiles with their crumpled bills, and the regulars called her kiddo with a familiarity that almost felt like belonging. With her first paycheck, she bought fabric from a thrift store and borrowed a sewing machine from one of her roommates. She took apart her worn dresses and restitched them, transforming scraps into clothes that looked fresh and fashionable. It was a skill born of necessity, but also of pride. In a world that often handed her cast-offs, she learned how to make something new. Life in that small rented room was far from easy. The radiator clanked in winter, but gave little heat. Summers were sweltering, a fan turning sluggishly in the window. Bills were split to the last cent, and sometimes she went to bed hungry. Still, Linda carried herself with quiet dignity. She believed in mornings, that each one might bring a chance at something better. She had no illusions that the world owed her kindness, but she held tight to the belief that she could carve out her own place within it. And though she would not have said it aloud, not to anyone, she longed for someone to see her not as a foster kid, not as a waitress in a grease-stained apron, but simply as a girl worth loving. That hope, fragile as it was, kept her alive. And soon, it would carry her into the encounter that would change everything. The Palmetto Grill was busy that Saturday morning, the kind of day when tourists stopped off the highway and truckers ordered stacks of pancakes with endless refills of coffee. Linda moved quickly between tables, balancing plates on her arm, smiling just enough to keep tips generous. She was tired but steady until the moment she tripped near the corner booth. A glass of sweet tea slid off her tray and splashed across the crisp, white shirt of a young man sitting by the window. The liquid spread like a stain of amber across the expensive fabric. Linda froze, mortified, her face flushing hot. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for napkins. The man looked down, then up at her, and instead of anger, his expression carried amusement. He took the napkins from her trembling hand and dabbed at his shirt. "Relax," he said gently, his voice calm, rich. "It's just tea. I'll survive." That was the first time Linda saw Jonathan Montgomery up close, the son of Charleston's mayor, though she didn't know it then. He had a presence that filled the space around him, tall, broad-shouldered, with steady gray eyes that seemed both serious and teasing at once. He introduced himself simply as John. She was still shaking when he smiled at her. "Do me a favor, though," he added. "Bring me another glass. I think I spilled this one." She laughed, nerves dissolving, and something shifted in the air between them. Over the next weeks, John returned to the diner often, always choosing her section. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with classmates from the College of Charleston, but he always left her a generous tip and a look that lingered just a second too long. Eventually, he asked if she'd like to take a walk after her shift. That walk turned into another and another. By summer, they were inseparable. John drove her to Myrtle Beach in his old Jeep, music blasting, hair whipping in the salty wind. They built bonfires with friends, swam at midnight under stars so bright they seemed alive. With him, Linda felt like she had been pulled into a world she had only glimpsed through the windows of the homes she cleaned. A world of promise, laughter, and freedom. For the first time in her life, she was more than a foster kid or a waitress. She was a girl in love, but love rarely erased class. The Montgomery family learned of John's relationship before summer ended. His mother invited Linda to their stately home on South Battery, a mansion with columns and manicured hedges. Linda arrived with trembling hands, dressed in the nicest dress she owned, her heart full of cautious hope. Instead of warmth, she was met with icy stares. John's mother looked her over as if she were something tracked in from the street. His aunt whispered loud enough for her to hear, "She reeks of grease and cheap perfume." John defended her fiercely, but it only deepened their scorn. His father, the mayor, did not speak directly to Linda at first. He simply turned his gaze on his son and said, "This won't last." The attacks became bolder. John's cousin came into the diner one evening, ordered a milkshake, and when Linda set it down, tipped the glass deliberately into her lap. "Oops," the cousin sneered. Customers turned to look, whispers spreading. Later that week, strangers approached her coworkers, offering money if they'd claim she was a thief, a drunk, a girl who sold herself behind the diner. Humiliation followed her home. The sting of sweet milk drying on her uniform. The shame of rumors, muttered, just loudly enough for her to hear. She tried to hide it from John, to protect the fragile joy they had found. But in the quiet of her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her face into her hands, wondering how long love could survive when the whole world was lined up against it. Still, she clung to him. John was the first man who had ever looked at her and seen more than poverty, more than a foster kid turned waitress. He saw Linda, and that was enough for now. The call came late on a humid August night. Linda had just returned from her shift, her shoes sticky with spilled soda, her hands raw from bleach. The phone on the small kitchen counter rang, a sound that startled her because hardly anyone ever called. When she picked it up, the voice on the other end was firm, clipped, and unmistakably authoritative. "This is Mayor Montgomery," the man said without introduction. His tone carried the weight of someone used to obedience. "You are to leave my son alone." Immediately, Linda's breath caught. "Sir, with all respect, John and I, you will tell him you found someone else. You will break it off. If you don't, you will regret it." There was no warmth, no room for negotiation. The line went dead before she could answer. Linda stood there in the silence, her knuckles white around the receiver. Her heart pounded, not with fear for herself, but for John. She couldn't bear to lose him, not when he was the only light in her life. She told herself that love this true couldn't be broken by threats. But the threats had already set things in motion. Within weeks, John was accepted into a student exchange program overseas. London. It was everything he had dreamed of, an opportunity that could shape his future. He held Linda close the night before he left, promising he'd write, promising nothing could come between them. She clung to him with everything she had, swallowing her dread, burying the memory of his father's voice in the pit of her stomach. When he boarded the plane, she told herself it was only for a year. She told herself he'd come back. But the mayor had other plans. Not long after John left, Linda's world collapsed. One busy evening at the diner, her boss, a man named Stan who usually barked orders more than he spoke, stormed out of the back office, holding a ledger in his hand. His face was red, his voice sharp enough to turn every head in the room. "Linda, you've been skimming money," he accused, waving the ledger. "Thousands missing from the register over the last month, and it all points to you." Linda's mouth fell open. "That's impossible. I never." But her protest was cut off by the arrival of two uniformed police officers. It was as if they had been waiting for the signal. They handcuffed her in front of customers, ignoring her cries, ignoring the tears that blurred her vision. At the station, she was booked, fingerprinted, photographed under a harsh light. She kept insisting there was a mistake, but no one listened. Within a week, she found herself in a courtroom, seated beside a weary public defender who barely looked at her. The prosecutor spoke with polished confidence, presenting ledger entries, falsified receipts, and testimony from Stan himself, who claimed he had caught her pocketing cash. Linda tried to explain, her voice breaking, but the judge cut her off. The public defender mumbled objections, too weak to matter. The entire trial lasted less than 2 days. When the verdict was read, guilty of embezzlement and theft, Linda's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. The clang of the gavel still echoed in her ears when the guards took her away. Prison was everything she had feared. Concrete walls, clanging doors, the stench of despair that never lifted. She kept her head down, did her assigned work, avoided the fights that sometimes broke out in the yard. She told herself she just had to survive. Then, one morning, weeks into her sentence, she felt the unmistakable sickness that had nothing to do with prison food. The nurse confirmed it with a test. Linda was pregnant. She sat on the edge of the narrow cot that night, the paper still trembling in her hand. For hours she stared at the wall, the truth slowly sinking into her bones. John's child, a life created in the midst of their brief, burning summer. Her hand slid to her abdomen, flat but already different in her mind. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she whispered to the life growing inside her. "It's just you and me now," she said, her voice cracking with both fear and promise. "I'll keep you safe. Somehow I'll keep you safe." In that cell, surrounded by bars and shadows, Linda made the only vow she could to endure. For her child, for their future, even if the rest of the world wanted her broken. She would not give them the satisfaction. Linda was released after serving only 18 months, credited for good behavior. She walked out of the prison gates, carrying nothing but a plastic bag of belongings and a heart that beat for more than just herself. Inside her, life was stirring stronger every day. She was 5 months pregnant when the world opened again, and the fear of survival was matched only by the fragile hope of motherhood. The pregnancy tethered her to reality in a way no parole officer could. She went to every checkup, rode buses across town to clinics where Medicaid covered the basics, and listened as nurses reminded her that stress could harm the baby. She nodded, but inside she carried a storm. Nights were long in her tiny rented room above a laundromat, where the smell of detergent clung to the air and the pipes rattled like chains. She kept one hand on her stomach, whispering promises to a child who could not yet hear them. When Daniel was born on a rainy spring morning, she cried harder than he did. He had his father's dark hair and her storm-gray eyes, wide and questioning. Holding him in the thin hospital blanket, she felt the weight of both curse and blessing. No family came to visit. No flowers appeared on the windowsill. Just a nurse who gently touched her shoulder and said, "You'll be okay." She was but just barely. Raising a son as a single mother with a record was a sentence of its own. Employers turned her away once they saw the box checked, yes on applications. Still, she found ways. She scrubbed offices at night, pushing heavy vacuums across endless floors, her body aching, but her spirit refusing to yield. She cleaned houses in neighborhoods that looked like John's, grand porches, manicured lawns, slipping in and out like a ghost. On weekends, she washed cars at a friend's garage, the cold water numbing her hands. And at night, when Daniel slept, she pulled out the old sewing machine she had borrowed years ago, stitching pillowcases and dresses for extra cash. Each job alone was not enough, but together they kept a roof over their heads and food on the table. Linda grew accustomed to exhaustion, her shoulders stiff, her fingers raw. Yet when Daniel reached for her with chubby arms, babbling her name, every ache was forgotten. He was her purpose, her redemption. But love given without limit can bend into something else. Linda shielded Daniel from the world's harshness too well. She made sure he never felt hunger, even if it meant she skipped meals. She bought him toys she couldn't afford, telling herself it was worth the overtime. She hid her weariness, laughing off her cracked heels and sore back. To him, she was simply mom, always there, always capable, always giving. By the time he reached middle school, Daniel carried himself with a quiet entitlement. He asked for new sneakers and expected them to appear. He complained when dinner wasn't exactly what he wanted. When teachers praised him, he accepted it as his due. He never thought to ask how his mother managed to pay for field trips or why her hands trembled when she counted change at the counter. Neighbors whispered about Linda, the ex-con cleaning lady, and though most kept their distance, she ignored them. All that mattered was Daniel. She convinced herself that if he could have what she never did, safety, comfort, the freedom to dream, then every judgmental stare, every ache in her bones would be worth it. At night, after he fell asleep, she sometimes sat alone at the table with bills spread out before her, the numbers refusing to stretch as far as she needed. She rubbed her temples and reminded herself, one more shift, one more month, one more sacrifice. Then she would peek into his room, watch the slow rise and fall of his chest, and believe it was enough. Linda knew, deep down, that Daniel didn't see the cost of her devotion. He couldn't. He was too young, too protected, too used to the comfort she fought to create. He didn't realize how much of her life had been spent bent over mop handles, hunched behind sewing machines, whispering reassurances to herself in dark rooms. But she accepted it. That was the bargain she had struck the day she carried him out of the hospital, her suffering in exchange for his chance. She would bear the weight, and he would never know how heavy it was. The morning of the wedding dawned hot and bright, Charleston's air heavy with magnolia and salt. Linda Whitaker woke before sunrise, her heart restless after a night of broken sleep. Daniel's words still echoed in her head. "Don't come, Mom. Please don't come." But the more she replayed them, the more she knew she couldn't obey. She had raised him, fought for him, given him everything she had. She would not sit in a dark apartment while her only child vowed his life away. From the back of her dresser, she pulled out the wooden box where she kept her savings. It wasn't much. Tips folded carefully over years, spare change collected in jars, the modest cushion she had built through stubborn sacrifice. Today it would be spent on herself for the first time in decades. By 9 a.m., She was seated in a salon chair on Meeting Street. The stylist, a young woman with tattoos of roses along her arm, ran fingers through Linda's hair. "You want elegance," she guessed, "something timeless." Linda nodded, nervous. "I don't want to look out of place." "You won't," the stylist promised. By the time she was done, Linda hardly recognized herself in the mirror. Her silver blonde hair had been swept into a soft chignon, her skin glowing with subtle makeup that erased years of exhaustion. A dress she had bought on consignment, a sapphire blue gown with a neckline that suggested quiet dignity, fit like it had been waiting for this day. She slipped into low heels and small pearl earrings, and when she stepped out onto the street, even strangers turned their heads. The wedding was held at a grand historic venue downtown, a mansion-turned ballroom where crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with gold trim. Guests in silk and tailored suits spilled across the lawn, laughing, sipping champagne. Luxury cars lined the street, photographers circled, and music from a string quartet floated in the air. When Linda walked through the doors, a ripple of surprise moved across the room. She carried herself with quiet grace, shoulders straight, chin lifted. Men glanced twice. Women whispered to each other, and for once the whispers did not sting. She was radiant, almost unrecognizable. Daniel spotted her just as the ceremony ended. His face drained of color. For a moment he simply stared, as though unsure if the elegant woman near the back row was truly his mother. Then panic flickered in his eyes. He cut through the crowd, forcing a smile at guests as he pulled Linda aside, his grip urgent on her arm. "Mom," he hissed, voice low, "what are you doing here? I asked you not to come." "I came to see my son get married," Linda answered calmly. "You don't understand. People will ask questions. They'll find out about your job, your past." He glanced around nervously, terrified that someone might overhear. "Why couldn't you just stay home?" Linda held his gaze, her storm gray eyes steady. "Because I've stayed home long enough." Before Daniel could argue, Sophia approached, her wedding gown flowing like ivory waves, her cheeks flushed with joy. She beamed when she saw Linda. "Mrs. Whitaker, you look stunning!" she exclaimed, taking her hand warmly. "I've been hoping to meet you. My parents would love for you to join us at the reception." Daniel stammered, trying to interject, but Sophia squeezed Linda's hand. "Please come celebrate with us. Your family." For a heartbeat, Linda felt the walls around her crack. The kindness in Sophia's eyes was genuine, free of judgment, free of the disdain she had expected. She smiled softly. "Thank you, dear. That means more than you know." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he couldn't contradict his bride in front of so many watching eyes. He forced a laugh, nodded, and let go of his mother's arm, but his discomfort hung heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Linda, meanwhile, took a slow breath. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. In that glittering ballroom, under the light of crystal chandeliers, she wasn't just the cleaner, the ex-con, the woman who had worked herself to the bone. She was a mother, a guest, a woman who belonged. And she knew this was only the beginning of the reckoning that day would bring. The reception glowed beneath chandeliers that scattered light across polished wood floors. Laughter and music filled the air, champagne glasses clinking as servers wove between tables. Linda sat quietly at the edge of the room, trying to remain unnoticed, though eyes still lingered on her. She wasn't accustomed to this kind of grandeur. Linen-covered tables, plated entrees that looked more like art than food. But she carried herself with composure, her sapphire gown lending her a dignity she hadn't felt in years. When it came time for parents to speak, a master of ceremonies announced her name. "Mrs. Whitaker, mother of the groom. Would you like to offer a blessing?" The words startled her. She hadn't prepared anything, hadn't expected to be included at all. Daniel shifted uneasily in his chair, as though bracing for disaster. But Sophia clapped her hands encouragingly, her smile bright. Guests turned toward Linda, waiting. Her steps to the stage were measured, her palms damp against the smooth silk of her dress. She took the microphone with a steady breath. For a moment, silence hung, heavy and expectant. Then she spoke. "My son," she began, her voice soft but carrying, "is the greatest gift I was ever given. I raised him the best I could, with the hope that one day he'd stand where he is now, ready to build a life with the woman he loves. To Daniel and Sophia, my prayer is simple. May you be kind to one another in every season. May you hold fast even when storms come, and may your love be greater than pride." Her words were not polished, but they rang with sincerity. The room stilled, and when she lowered the microphone, the applause rose like a tide, warm, genuine, filling the hall. For a moment, Linda felt something she hadn't in decades: respect. As she stepped down from the small stage, someone moved into her path. A tall man in a tailored suit, silver threading his dark hair, gray eyes that pierced straight into her. Her breath caught. "Linda," he said softly, disbelieving. "It's really you." Her heart stumbled. "John." Jonathan Montgomery smiled, though his expression trembled with emotion. "I never thought I'd see you here. My God, you look the same. Stronger, maybe. Even more beautiful." Linda could barely find her voice. "What are you doing here?" "I'm a business partner of Sophia's father," John explained, his words rushed, as if afraid time might cut them short. "I didn't know you'd be here. When I saw you on that stage," he shook his head, eyes bright with something like grief. "Linda, I have to tell you the truth. All those years ago, when I left for London, my father told me you'd run off with someone else. That you'd left me. He said it to my face, and I believed him, or at least I thought I had to. I tried to find you, but everyone swore you were gone." Her throat tightened. "I never left you. They took everything from me, John. They made sure you couldn't hear my side." "I knew it," he whispered fiercely. "I knew in my gut it was a lie. Linda, I've never stopped thinking about you. Not once. Even through my marriage, which failed. Even through the years. You've never left me." Her eyes burned, her heart torn open by the sudden flood of memory and regret. She should have hated him for believing the lies, for leaving her alone in the storm. But all she felt was the ache of what might have been. "Don't let's talk of sorrow tonight," she said, her voice trembling. "This is a wedding. Let's dance." John's hand found hers, warm and steady. He led her to the dance floor, where the band played a slow waltz. Guests turned their heads, whispering, but Linda heard nothing but the music. They moved together as if no time had passed, eyes locked, the air charged with memories and longing. Across the room, Daniel watched, his glass paused halfway to his lips. For the first time, he truly saw his mother, not as the cleaner he had tried to hide, not as the shadow behind a success, but as a woman. Elegant, dignified, desirable. His chest tightened with a shame he could not name. And Linda, twirling under the chandelier's light, felt the years melt away. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to be seen. The reception stretched late into the night, the music softening, the chatter fading as guests drifted out to waiting cars. The chandeliers dimmed to a golden glow, and the laughter that had once filled the ballroom dwindled to murmurs. Linda stood near the tall French doors that opened onto a terrace, the humid Charleston air brushing her skin. John was at her side, his presence steady, his hand brushing hers as if anchoring her to the moment. She should have felt nervous, even ashamed, but she didn't. For the first time in years, she felt whole. "Come with me," John whispered. His voice was both gentle and urgent, the same tone he had used when they were young, standing barefoot on the beach with sand between their toes. "Don't disappear again. Not tonight." Linda nodded slowly. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, She only knew she couldn't lose this second chance. Together, they stepped through the doors, out into the warm night where lanterns glowed along the terrace. Their footsteps echoed softly against the stone. But before they reached the gates, a voice cut through the quiet. "Mom." Daniel came rushing out, his tie loosened, his face pale. His eyes darted between his mother and John, confusion and fear colliding in his expression. He caught her arm, desperation burning in his grip. "Where are you going? With him? You can't just leave like this." Linda turned, her storm gray eyes meeting his. For a moment, she almost faltered. He was still her boy, the baby she had carried, the child she had fed and clothed and defended. But he was also the man who had tried to erase her from the most important day of his life. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. "I'm walking away," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "with the man I would follow to the ends of the earth." Daniel froze, shock written across his face. "Mom, what are you saying?" His gaze flicked to John, then back to her, panic rising. "You don't even know him." Linda's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "I know him better than anyone. And so do you, though you don't realize it yet." She rested a hand on John's arm, feeling his strength beneath the fabric of his suit. "Daniel, this is Jonathan Montgomery. He's your father." The world seemed to stop. The sounds of Charleston, the faint horns from the harbor, the cicadas in the trees, blurred into silence. Daniel's eyes widened as if the truth itself struck him like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, his mouth opening but no words coming. John's expression mirrored his son's, but layered with guilt and grief. "I never knew," he said hoarsely, looking between Linda and Daniel. "I swear I never knew. If I had—" He stopped, shaking his head, pain etched in every line of his face. Daniel's chest rose and fell, his breath shallow. He stared at his mother, his voice breaking. "All these years, you let me think I didn't have a father. Why?" Linda swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Because I thought it was safer. Because I was told you'd never want me, never want us. Because they took him away before he even knew about you." She turned to John, her eyes glistening. "And because I was too busy keeping you alive to explain what had been stolen from us." The three of them stood beneath the golden terrace lights, caught between past and future. Daniel's hands shook, torn between anger, betrayal, and something deeper, recognition. John reached forward, as if to close the impossible distance, but stopped just short, waiting. Linda looked at her son and then at the man beside her. She knew the road ahead would not be simple. Secrets, this heavy left scars. But in that moment, under the Charleston night sky, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't resolution. But it was the beginning of a conversation long overdue. And for the first time, Linda felt that perhaps her story, fractured and battered though it was, had not ended in tragedy after all. It had only reached the moment where truth finally stepped into the light.